Have you been finding your chord progressions lack a little something? Well, listen, I've been doing some digging and I've discovered an obscure old beat and harmony combo called the Beatles. And it turns out they were very, very good at this sort of thing. So I've got 3 examples for you today of some great chord changes that break the rules. Right, first of all then, what rules am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the rules of traditional diatonic harmony. So, what the hell do I mean by that? Well, the harmonic content of a song, i.e. the chords, is usually completely diatonic. That is to say, completely taken from one particular key or scale. So, for example, if we take the scale of C major, which is nice and easy to think about because it's all the natural notes. It's C, D, E, F, G, A and B. From that scale, we can derive some chords, i.e. some harmony when we play the notes together. And the way this is done is we combine every other note from within the scale. So for example, if we take the first note, the third note and the fifth note, we get C, E and G, which gives us a C major chord. If we then take the second, fourth and sixth note of the scale, we get D, F and A, which gives us a D minor chord. If we then take the E, the G and the B, that is say the third, fifth and seventh notes of the scale, we get an E minor chord and so on, until we end up with the following chords: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor and B diminished. And what you'll often find is if you come across a song in the key of C, the entire chord progression will be taken from that pool of chords. Now, is this a rule in any meaningful sense of the word? Of course not. You can do whatever you want when you write songs. However, it is significant just how many pop and rock songs, whether deliberately or not, are completely diatonic, are taken completely from one particular scale. And it's significant how often the Beatles didn't do this and included what we might call non-diatonic chords within the progressions. Now, riddled with musical genius though they were, they didn't lift this stuff completely out of thin air, as we'll go on to see. Let's look at our first chord progression. Okay, for our first example, let's move briefly to the key of A. Now, let's say in your song, you wanted to move between the root chord, the A, and the 4 chord, the note built on the 4th degree of the A major scale, which would be D. I mean, no one's going to deny that works. It's a little bit pedestrian sounding though. So consider an old rock and roll song that the Beatles used to cover in their early days called Darktown Strutter's Ball by Joe Brown, which does the following. It moves from A to a B7 up to D. And it's that B7 chord that has liberated us from the shackles of traditional diatonic harmony. Because you may remember, if we're in a major key, the chord built on the 2nd degree of the scale, in this case B, should be a minor. But by playing that 2nd chord as a dominant 7, we're including this non-diatonic note, which gives the whole thing a little bit more of a bluesy sort of a feel. So we're kind of getting a little bit of both worlds there. We're getting the upbeat feel of a major tune, but incorporating a little bit of a darker edge via that bluesy non-diatonic note in the B7 chord. So there's a really nice variation that the Beatles were very wise to, using a major or dominant 7 chord on the 2nd degree of the scale, which they did in the key of D, which would take us from D to E7 to G. In 8 days a week, of course. And Oasis were certainly paying attention to this kind of thing as well. Fans may recognise, if we move to the key of B, the chorus of All Around the World. So, the major or dominant 2nd chord, really nice way of adding a little bit of edge to a major chord progression. Let's look at another. Okay, our next order of business also has to do with the 4 chord, specifically how the 4 chord resolves back to the 1 chord. So for this example, we're going to go over to the key of G, where our 4 chord is a C. So lovely traditional resolution there from C to G. But let's see if we can squeeze a little bit more emotional content out of that resolution. And we're going to do that by altering the nature of the 4 chord. We're going to play C and then C minor and then G. So C minor, obviously not part of the G major scale pool of notes, but it's a really nice common variation on the 4 chord that you hear in songwriting, particularly of a certain period. I would hazard a guess that the obvious reference point for the Beatles here would have been A Devil in Her Heart by the Donnés, simply because they covered that on with the Beatles album. And it does exactly that. C, C minor, G. Gives the whole resolution a lovely, delicate sort of a feel via this descending chromatic line, which comes at the top of the chord. And the Beatles use this certainly in My Life in the key of A, where at the pivotal emotional moment we go from a D to a D minor to an A. So really nice sort of classic era songwriting way of getting back to the 1 chord. Again, Oasis were certainly learning a few lessons here. If we consider in the key of C and think of the bridge of Don't Look Back in Anger, where it goes from F to F minor to C. Also, funnily enough, in the same key, the chorus of Beatles by Blur does the same thing. F, F minor, C. Okay, third up. And third example then. Let's go to the key of E. And assume you were going to write a kind of a blues-influenced up-tempo sort of a tune in the key of E major. Chances are you would use the chords 4, A, and 5, B. So far, so conventional, but consider what we can achieve if we borrow chords from the parallel minor scale. So, what I mean by that. If we consider chord 3 in the key of E major, excuse me, chord 3 in the key of E major would be a G sharp minor. And that's a lovely chord change in and of itself, but let's say we wanted to turn this pop song into a little bit more of a rock song and we need something a little bit edgier and a little bit darker. If we borrow chord 3 from the E minor scale, that would give us a G major. And that change from E major to G major has a little bit more intrigue about it, because you wouldn't traditionally get both of those chords as majors. But via that climb up of a minor third, we get something a little bit edgier. And you can hear this in, amongst other places, the song Lend Me Your Comb by Carl Perkins, which again the Beatles were definitely familiar with because they covered it, and you can hear it on the Anthology collection. And it's this kind of thing. And you can hear a pretty obvious source of inspiration there for the song Please Please Me. And so on. So there we go, a few simple ways to inject a little bit of Beatles magic into your own chord progressions. Really hope there was some stuff of interest there to you. If so, please consider liking, subscribing, and even commenting if you really want to go to town. But thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you with something else next week. Cheers, bye.